We'd play street hockey near my house there with my brothers and some neighbors and stuff. Sometimes I'd do a play-by-play. So I remember my mother said to me one day, I think when I was about 12 years old or something like that, she said, "You're going to be a broadcaster, I can tell. You're going to be a sports broadcaster." And so sure enough, she was absolutely right.
Welcome to the Calgary Sessions. This is episode number 135. I'm your host, Jeff Humphreys. Before I get into it, if you like this episode or previous ones, please share it. I'm trying to get some more exposure on the show. Today's guest, I am thrilled to have this person on the show, so I will get out of the way. Name and who you are.
I'm Peter Maher, the retired play-by-play broadcaster of the Calgary Flames.
It's So my good friend Murph, who works at Professional Skate, Rick Murphy, when I had this idea of like getting you on the show, I'm like, who do I know in the hockey world that could get to Peter Maher? So I text Murph, and then he hooked me up with your son. So that's kind of how this one played out. So thanks for showing up. This is going to be a fun one for me to kind of experience. Well, thank you.
Good. Well, Jeff, my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So the show. So I like the guests to kind of go back as far as they want to go. You know, go back to like where they grew up, how they grew up, you know, take it as far back as you can, kind of where you want to go or what you remember, and then we'll kind of weave our way to where you are today and your kind of journeys along the way. So take it back as far as you want to go.
Well, my broadcast or journalism life goes back to my roots in New Brunswick. I was born in Campbellton, New Brunswick, and fortunately, the home where I lived in was near a softball park. And that softball league in my hometown of Campbellton was very, very popular at that point in time. And they had a public address system there. And when I was 15 years old, I think I started when I was 14 and then landed into 15, I was doing the PA announcing on the games, you know, the batter up and so on and so forth. And that's how I started. And one of the players in the softball league was the radio station manager in Campbellton, CKNB. And at one point he came to me and he said, why don't you file a report to the radio station after each game, and then they can run it the next morning. So I agreed to do that. And so I do the public address announcements on the ball game, and then after the game was over, I'd do a voice report for the radio station, which usually was about 45 seconds in length, and that's how I began, really. And then that eventually led into me doing some writing with the local weekly newspaper, the Campbellton Graphic, which is no longer in existence. But I did write sports, starting with softball, and then as the hockey season came on, I was doing some reporting on the hockey as well. And then my last year of high school, the radio station manager said, we'd like you to be our morning and afternoon sports guy. So on the radio station, I would go in the morning at about 6:30 and do the run from 7 o'clock to 8:30, go to school, and then come back and do the afternoon run from 4:30 to 6 o'clock. So that's how I got started in the business. And I didn't get to, and I also was writing for the newspaper, as I mentioned, and that led me to also doing some correspondence work for the two provincial newspapers in New Brunswick, one out of Moncton and one of St. John. And I would be doing stories and reports on hockey games that were played in Campbellton and nearby Dalhousie, which was 16 miles away. And they also had a pretty good hockey team. And so that's how I got started in the business. I was doing radio, weekly newspaper, and daily newspaper. So after games, I wasn't doing the play-by-play at that point, but after games, I would phone the newspapers and give them an account of the game, usually about a 7 or 8 paragraph story, and they would run it in the paper. And so eventually, that led into me becoming the play-by-play broadcaster in my hometown in Campbellton, New Brunswick, and also I was broadcasting games for the Dalhousie Rangers, who were 16 miles away and in the same league. And so that's how then I got into the play-by-play, starting with the 1970-71 season.
Do you remember that clear as day when you start, 70, 71? It was just, you'll always
remember the very first game. It was in Memorial Gardens, which is the arena in my hometown at the time, and it had been renovated a bit.
Yeah.
And so to have a ceremony for the reopening of it, they brought in the Nova Scotia Voyageurs, which were the #1 farm team for the Montreal Canadiens. And a player that played in that game was Larry Robinson. So the very first game that I broadcast, he played, and much, much later on, after I had established my broadcast career, and Larry, who was then a coach with Los Angeles, and I went to him one day and I said, the very first game I ever broadcast, you played in it. So I told him a bit about it. I said, I'd like to get an autographed stick from you if you don't mind. So he autographed the stick and that sort of thing. So I still have that at home.
Amazing.
The stick that he signed for me. So that's how it began.
Yep.
And fortunately, through the 70s, not only was the hockey games that I broadcasting and also doing radio station work morning and afternoon, I was also doing the newspaper writing as well for the papers that I mentioned earlier. So it was hockey nights were kind of a full night for me. I do the play-by-play, and when the game was over, I'd get on the phone and call these two newspapers in the province and they had to give them different stories on the game that was played. Just the facts are the same, but worded differently. So
amazing.
So anyway, that's how it got started. And unfortunately, from 1970 through to 1977, there were very good teams in Campbellton in particular. Dalhousie had a pretty good team as well. So I got to broadcast lots of games. And that got me prepared for what I eventually got to.
Were you always interested in it? When you start off early, calling these games at 14, 15, the baseball games, before that, was it?
Oh yeah.
When
we'd play street hockey near my house there with my brothers and some neighbors and stuff. And I remember one day my mother said, and sometimes I'd do a play-by-play of the game.
As you're playing?
As I was a goalie, so I was doing play-by-play. And I'd also do play-by-play of table hockey when we'd play inside. So I remember my mother said to me one day, I think when I was about 12 years old or something like that, she said, "You're going to be a broadcaster, I can tell. You're going to be a sports broadcaster." And so sure enough, she was right. Absolutely right. Yeah.
Was sport a big part of your youth? Was it around your house and your community? Was sport a big piece of your world?
That was huge. Yeah, huge. If it wasn't hockey in the wintertime, it was softball or baseball in the summertime. So I was very much involved in sports in my hometown, and even in those early years, and gradually growing up to be into it much, much more.
Yeah.
And so, as I was saying, in the 70s, the Campbellton Tigers team won 2 Canadian championships, and one was in 72, and the other one was in 77. And Dalhousie went to the Allen Cup semifinals one year. So that was lots of hockey. And when I'm talking to youngsters that are aspiring to be play-by-play broadcasters, the one thing I tell them is that the more games you can broadcast, the better, even if it's not on the air. If you go into a Canucks game at the Max Bell Arena or a Hitman game at the Saddledome, sit off in a corner somewhere and do a play-by-play into a tape machine. Because the more you do, you learn more about play-by-play. I remember the first game that I ever called, you're trying to call everything. Well, you can't do that. Hockey, as a play-by-play guy, you have to edit the game, how it goes. And so that's how I learned. I mean, I started off, you're trying to call every hit, every shot, but you just can't do that.
There's not enough time.
And I always say, for radio, very important to remember the lines on the ice. The blue line, the center red line, and the end lines, the red lines, and the circles. Because when you're doing play-by-play, you're painting a picture for the listener. Television, the fan can see the game, so you don't have to say the red line or the left face-off circle or that sort of thing as frequently. But in radio, you do.
Yeah.
And the other important thing I learned really early on was to say the score. You can never say the score too much. Because on radio, people are, you get some that are listening to the entire game, but you get some that are tuning in and out.
Yeah.
And when they tune in, the first thing they want to know, what's the score? And so when I'm talking to young aspiring broadcasters, I tell them you can never say the score too much. I remember one time the Flames lost a game, I think it was 8-2, And the next day, I'm at the Saddledome, and a guy comes up to me and he said, I listened to most of your game last night, and you said the score too much. I said, yeah, I didn't like saying it, but the game was on radio. People tune in, tune out. The first thing they want to know is the score. So, so that's anyway. That's a little bit of education in the early part of my broadcasting.
Did you know, like when you started going down this path of writing, you're just heavily involved in the sport world through writing and calling games. Did you know coming out of high school, or did you go to university or something? Like, did you know this was the path? Like, what did it look like for you? Was there any like hesitation coming out of high school or post-secondary that what you were going to do with your life?
Well, that's what I wanted to do. And I got very fortunate. In the summer of, on the long weekend, the Labor Day long weekend, the September long weekend in 1977, I just happened to be reading, this was on a Saturday morning, and the provincial newspaper, I got that and was reading it, and there was about a 4-paragraph story right down on the bottom of the last sports page, and it said how the radio broadcast rights of Toronto Maple Leaf games had changed from Foster Hewitt Station. Foster was a legend. He owned a radio station, CKFH in Toronto, and they had the Maple Leaf broadcasts for a long, long time. But this new upstart radio station, CKO, came in and outbid them for the rights. And as I would learn later, is that Harold Ballard, who was the owner of the Maple Leafs at the time, very controversial, he and Foster didn't get along. And this new radio station, CKO, which was Canada's first all-news radio station, they bid $100,000 for the rights. And Foster had been paying about $35,000. And so one of Harold's guys went to Foster and told him, he said, you have to match this $100,000 fee or you're not going to have the rights again. And so he thought it was a game to get him to put the price up, his price up that they'd spend rather than the $35,000. But it turned out it was no hoax, it was a fact. And so anyway, this CKO radio station, which at the time had a radio station, its primary radio station was in Toronto, but all the major cities in Canada had the station. Like Calgary had a CKO station at the time, and also Vancouver, Montreal, Ottawa, and cities that didn't have an NHL team at that time, which Calgary didn't, got the Maple Leaf games. So anyway, I read this, and on the Tuesday after the long weekend, there was a name in the story of the radio station manager, David Ruskin, and so I phoned the radio station on Tuesday, and said, I understand you have the broadcast rights, and I'm interested in doing the play-by-play, and so he said, we're not sure what we're doing with regard to a play-by-play broadcaster, but send us your resume and send us your recording of your broadcast. So back in those days, it was reel-to-reel, so you had to get a box together.
Those big reels?
So fortunately, I had recorded some of the games from the year previous when the Campbellton team went to the Canadian finals. So anyway, I sent that off to him, and it was about 2 weeks later, he got back to me and he said, you're one of our 3 guys that we want to audition for the job. And so I said, okay, when do you want, because at this point, the exhibition games had already started in the NHL. And so he said, we've got a game on Wednesday night. This was on a Friday. He said, we've got a game next Wednesday. We need you to come to Toronto on Tuesday, and we'll have a meeting with you during the day. And that night, Montreal and Toronto are playing at Maple Leaf Gardens, and you can broadcast from one of the periods of that game, and the other 2 people will do the other periods.
And then, just like a private recording, just so they could hear.
Yeah. This wasn't going on the air. No, this was so. Anyway, so I, say fine.
Wait, sorry, when they say that, like come to Maple Leaf Gardens, Leafs, Habs. So it's all iconic. The Gardens, the Leafs, the Habs.
Yeah.
Are you nervous? Are you like confident, or like what are you thinking when this actually?
Well, I was pretty nervous right almost from the time I got that phone call until the time I stepped into the booth, actually. But I did my preparation and went, and all that sort of thing. And I was glad it was Toronto and Montreal playing, because I'd watched their games on television, the year before or years before that. So I was very familiar with the players and the numbers on both of those teams. And the other good thing for me is it turned out I did the second period. So it allowed me to watch the first period and in my mind do a mental play-by-play of what was happening, to more to identify players than anything else. So anyway, so I went in and I did the second period. And after that, as it would turn out, the farm team for the Maple Leafs was in Moncton, New Brunswick. And the editor of the newspaper that I was doing writing for, he happened to be at this exhibition game. He was there covering the training camp. And so he saw me there and asked me what I was doing there. And I said, well, I'm here auditioning for the Leafs job. And so anyway, so I went out and I had a couple of beer with him after, and then went home the next day. And then I got home on the Thursday, and he said, yes, you're our guy. And for the salary we talked about when you were here, now we need you to come back up to Toronto tomorrow, because we're going to do a practice run on Saturday night of the game the Leafs had against somebody, against Chicago. And so he said, you have to come up and do the dry run. It's not going to be on the air, but it's going to be to give everybody involved a chance to learn how the thing is going to come out when we do our first real game, which is on Wednesday. So he said, you come up, do the game, you go back on Sunday, you need to be back here on Tuesday to start work. So it all happened in a week.
Quick. Really quick.
Yeah, very quick.
And when you, like, when all this is happening, are you like trusting it? You're like, this is what I'm supposed to do. Like, this is, this is years behind me of experience, and just like, now's my time. I know, and I got ready for it as it would any other game, whether it was the North Shore Hockey League or the National Hockey League. What does that look like? What does the get ready piece look like?
Well, it's almost a full day. You prepare more than you actually do on air work.
Yeah, because the game's 60 minutes.
Yeah. Well, so what you would do, what I would do is, just to go back when I was here, in Calgary here doing the Flame games, I'd get up in the morning at about 6:30, 7 o'clock, and I'd do a morning show on the radio station at 8 o'clock for about 15 minutes, so I'd prepare for that. So after that was done, I would start getting prepared for the hockey game that night. I'd be first that started off, I was doing things handwritten, and then the computers came along, and so I was able to do it. But to be quite frank, I liked it better when I was writing the facts on my fact sheet, because I could remember them easier.
Right.
When you typed them, it didn't have quite the same lasting memory. But anyway, but it was faster. But and you had to study it a little bit more after you had it. So anyway, I do that. Then you go to the morning skate, which is usually get to the arena about 10 o'clock. And the home team is on the ice first. And you watch their practice, you see what the lines are and the defense pairings and that sort of thing. After that's over, you do your interviews for the broadcast that night in the dressing room. And then you go back up into the seats and watch the visiting team have their morning skate. And in the morning school, when the visiting team was on, there used to be a time in the NHL when the visiting team would be on in the morning and they'd have numbers on there. The numbers they wore in the game, they wore on the back of the practice jerseys they wore. So that changed. And so when that changed, they had numbers on the back of their helmet. That's all. And so then I would sit close to the ice surface and again do a play-by-play in my mind of the players as they moved around during the morning practice. And so after that, you'd go in and do the interviews for the show that night with players on the visiting team or the home team, depending on where you were. So anyway, when that's done, I would then go home or back to the hotel, and I would then finalize my work, my preparation. And I keep notes on all players. and I'd go to that on the given night and put that into the slot after each player. And a lot of that you have to memorize, because some of it you would throw in, like supposing the Flames are on a power play, and Ginla's coming up the ice, and he's got 30 goals, 16 of them are on the power play. So you work it in real quick as they go up. So you have to have that in your head, because you don't have time to check your cheat sheet, as I call it. So anyway, so I do that. Then after that was done, I usually go and do a little bit of workout in if I was on the road, the hotel gym, or I had a little setup at home then as well. I do that, and then I lay down, have a little rest, get cleaned up, and then go to the arena and be there about an hour and a half before the start of the game. And usually what I would do, the first thing I do is go up to the booth and get myself all set up there, and by the time that's done, then the visiting team comes on the ice, or the two teams come on the ice for the warm-up. And when the warm-up's on, I watch the visiting team really close, doing a play-by-play in my mind, just to make sure I get all the numbers, names straight in my head. So, and then the game starts, and away you go.
Away you go. It's from the outside, you never really think about all the work that leads up to this to the call, right?
Yes, yeah.
You're like, these guys probably they just do it.
Yeah.
But there's all that work.
Oh yeah, and then after the game is over, you get on do some more interviews.
Yeah.
and then in the early years of it, when they had it, we didn't have a post-game show. That was a 10-minute post-game show that you do from up in the booth, and that was it. And then in 1990, I started having a post-game show that lasted for an hour and a half. So
your days just went.
I'd get home at midnight and the whole day.
Up at 6 and home at midnight.
Yeah.
It's a long day.
Anyway, so that's basically mine. So to go back to the story.
Yeah, Toronto, yeah.
In Toronto, it was that anyway. So I do that and get there and do my first real game.
And who was the first? Who was the first game you
First game was Toronto and Atlanta.
No way.
Yeah, it was the Maple Leafs and the Atlanta Flames.
No way.
Funny how that all would change, how that would go from there. Yeah.
Back then, like who were the names on those teams? Like was he a Thrasher?
No, Lanny wasn't there. Lanny was with the Leafs. Here's an interesting little sidebar. The very first goal that I ever called in an NHL game that was live broadcast, Lanny scored it. And the last goal that he ever scored, I called that one.
Amazing.
When he was with the Flames. But yeah, there was Lanny and Daryl Sittler and Ian Turnbull and Boreas Alming and Mike Palmatier and Tiger Williams. Those are all guys with the Maple Leafs back then. So
wild.
Yeah, that's where that started.
And when you like that first game, like when you call that first game, is it like it's got to be a similar feeling to these players playing their first NHL game, like their first big league game. Like it's a monumental moment.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, and I listened to the game afterwards just to see how I went. I was
pretty good.
Pretty happy with it. Yeah.
What are the?
But I wouldn't say it wasn't the best I ever called, because as I got more, I got better. Let's put it that way. And going back to what I was saying earlier, the more you do, the more you edit the game and do it, better properly.
Yeah. So where does your path go? So how long were you working with Toronto for?
I was with Toronto for 2 years.
Okay.
And so their contract was for 2 years, the radio station. So after the second year, they were having problems, financial problems, and they eventually went out of business. Not because what they were paying me, but what they were
$100,000 to get there.
But yeah, as I say, they were Canada's first all-news radio station. They were a little bit too early at that time. And as I say, they eventually, I think it was a year or two after I left there, they went out of business. And so they didn't renew for the rights after the 2 years. And Harold Ballard's station got them back again. So Harold still had his sons there to broadcast. So there was no job opening there for me.
Yep.
Again, I got another break there in that was in 1980, the summer of 80. That was the year the Flames moved to Calgary from Atlanta. And so, and Jiggs McDonald, who had been the play-by-play guy in Atlanta for the Flames, he moved to New York to broadcast the Islanders. And he broadcast their 4 straight Stanley Cups.
Ooh.
And so,
that's a good gig.
It created an opening here for the radio position. And so I applied for the job, and I was fortunate there in that all of the games that I broadcast the Maple Leafs were heard on the CKO Calgary station.
Right.
And so my voice was familiar to to some of the local population, and so that helped. That helped me eventually get the job, and so that began a 34-year run.
So the move from like out east to out west, was that unsettling at all, or were you confident that coming to Calgary would be a good spot for you to?
Well, I didn't. When I moved to Toronto, I was going from a city of about 12,000 people to a city of 12 million, roughly. And so coming to Calgary was a much smaller city. So although it was a different culture, different atmosphere coming out here, but no, I didn't feel. I just figured it's NHL, it's play-by-play, and the big difference in the first years here was that the games were in the Corral. And at your broadcast location, you were practically on the ice.
And the glass just
and
like
the glass,
wobbling back and forth.
And the boards were higher. And the Flames really used that to an advantage, especially the first year here, because they ended up going to the Stanley Cup semifinals before losing out to Minnesota. And a lot of that had to do with, and that year they lost only 5 regular season games at home out of 40. And so, and then in the playoffs, they had another good run in the playoffs at home. But the boards in the Corral were higher than the normal NHL boards, and the glass were kind of wobbly around there, and the crowd was almost on the ice.
Oh, yeah.
So it was intimidating, and the Flames in those days had an intimidating team, and so they had a lot of success in the Corral, especially that first year. And then as years went on, then they moved over to the Saddledome, and we went from a broadcast facility that was almost on the ice to one that was way up high. So but I still say to this day that the broadcast location in Calgary, in the Saddledome, which is going to be torn down in about 3 years, has the best broadcast location in the NHL.
No way.
Now, because it's high, but it's up over the crowd. Like people didn't like to walk across the catwalk that you had to go across to get to the broadcast location, but it helped make a great location, a great view of the game, because you're kind of up over the ice, sort of, and you can pick up the players. You can anticipate a little easier what's going to happen ahead of time because of where you're located. So, and it's interesting when Edmonton had a real good one too in the old building, and I remember when they were talking about the new building for Edmonton. One night the Flames were in Edmonton, and I was talking to Kevin Lowe. At that time, he was the president of the Oilers, and so I said, Kevin, when you get to your new arena, make sure the broadcast location is the same as it is here, because it was similar to what Calgary has in the Saddledome. And he said, oh yeah, definitely. So then when they opened the new building, the broadcast location was in the last row, behind the last row of seats. You're 100 miles from the ice almost.
Crazy.
And I know, I never broadcast a game there, but talking to broadcasters that have broadcast games there, they find it really difficult. In fact, the television people wouldn't work there. They ended up getting a suite right down in the lower level, a suite of their own that they had to pay for.
Wow!
Because it made it easier for the broadcast to identify the players. So I'm sure Bob Cole had to go up into where the location is for the radio people. He would have found it a hard time to do that. But fortunately for him, he didn't have to experience that. So there's all kinds of little things to go along with this in the business. So
did you like back then, like when you're kind of, starting with Toronto, coming to Calgary, you're kind of early in your career. Was there a lot of characters like wanting to be broadcasters? Like, was there like competition, or was it like every NHL team kind of had their person? But was there like, were you lucky to get these roles, or was it?
It's like I say, I'm fortunate. I got breaks.
Yeah.
And of course, you get breaks, you got to make the most of them, which I fortunately was able to do. But that reading that newspaper, like, it's not like today. If there was a broadcast position open, you'd know about it.
Yeah.
Because of the internet and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
In those days, there was no internet. There was nothing. If I hadn't seen that newspaper article, that job would have been filled before I knew it was open. And so, that was the thing. And I got that break, and then coming to Calgary, the other break I got was at my games that I broadcast in Toronto were heard here in Calgary.
Yeah.
And of course, James McDonald didn't come here. So it's all kinds of little things fall into place but like I say, you need to get breaks, but then when you get them, you got to basically kick the door in and do the job. So, but yeah, there are a lot of guys, like they're junior hockey and senior hockey in those days. They all had their broadcasters, and most of them anyway, aspired to be in the National Hockey League. So, you know, they'd be all looking if you could find jobs, like, you know, digging in their heels. Nowadays, they would know when there's a job open. In fact, you know, when the opening came here in Calgary, everybody knew about it. So everybody in the broadcast world. So I'm sure that they had all kinds of people apply for that job. I didn't, though. It was interesting. Yeah, I do charity work now, especially for Alzheimer's Calgary, which, if I can get a plug in, I'm the honorary chair for the Alzheimer's Calgary Walk Run. And that's coming up on Thanksgiving weekend on the Sunday of Thanksgiving weekend, October the 13th this year. Anyway, I was in there a couple of weeks ago doing phone calls promoting the event. And most of the time, I just get an answering machine, and I'd give a message. And so this one time, this fellow answered, and so I was talking to him, and he said, he said, you should apply for that job that's open for the television broadcast of the Flame games. I said to him, well, I thank you very much for your thoughtfulness, but I don't think I could call a game today. So I said, I'm older, and when you broadcast a game on hockey, you've got to talk fast and you got to talk loud because you got a crowd in the background. And I say, I don't know that I could last a period, let alone a whole game. Now, my conversation with you could go along fine, but beyond that, I don't think I could do that. But thank you very much for thinking of me. So that was funny how things go along.
Yeah.
So yeah.
What when you first got to Calgary, the first couple of years.
Oh, I should mention too that.
No, yeah, of course.
I should mention that. After I left Toronto and I came here and broadcasting the Leaf games, in 1983, the television people in Toronto came to me and wanted me to go back to Toronto and broadcast the Wednesday night games, Maple Leaf games on Wednesday and the odd game on Saturday. And so I talked to them about it, and I said, no, I'm not quite prepared to go back. There's not enough games for me. I mean, you're talking about 28 games or as compared to 82. So I've got, and so they said, okay. They looked at the schedule and they got back to me and they said, okay, most Wednesday nights are open for the Flames. So we'd like to have you come in and do the games on those nights that the Flames are not playing, because the Flames are my number one commitment. And so I would for 3 years, this went on for 3 years. I would broadcast the Flame game on Tuesday night. I would take the red-eye flight to Toronto, go to the morning skate, go to the hotel, have a little bit of a rest, and then go broadcast the game, rush to the airport to get a flight out of Toronto. I think it was at 11:45 that was going to Calgary to get me here about 2 a.m. And so the Flames would have a game on Thursday. And so
3 years?
Yeah, for 3 years I did that.
Wow.
And then finally they said, well, you either have to come or we're going to have to get somebody else. We just can't keep going back and forth. And the schedule wasn't as better for it as it went along. So anyway, they made me the last offer. And one of the things the guy said, you'll be number 2 to Bob Cole. And so I gave that a thought. And so finally I said to him, no, I'm not going to take it. I'm going to stay here in Calgary. And so as fate would have it, a number of years later, the managing editor or the managing director of the games that the Maple Leafs were playing on Wednesday night, his daughter was married to a Flame player. And he came out here at Christmas, and he was at one of the morning skates or a practice, and so I see him in the stand, so I go over and I sit with him, and we're having a nice chat and so on. And I said, a long time ago there, when you said to me if I took that job in Toronto you were offering, I'd be number 2 to Bob Cole. I said, if I'd have taken that job, I'd still be number 2 to Bob Cole now, and it's 15 years later. So we had a good laugh about that and that sort of thing. So yeah, that was to this day, I don't know how I did that. Going down, broadcasting a game here on Tuesday. Yeah. And then in 1 year in there was I broadcast the Stampeder games 1 year. the broadcast rights are up, and the radio station that I was working for here at the time, QR, they took the broadcast rights for 1 year, and they said, we're only got it for 1 year. We don't think you should hire anybody. Can you do the football games too? And I said, well, I've never broadcast a football game, so I know a little about football. Anyway, as it turned out, I did it, and Mike Lashik was my color commentator, and Mike really knew football, so that was good. I could just do, he'd pass the ball, or he'd hand it off the ball, or whatever, go from there. But what was interesting is that one segment, I had on Friday, let me get this right here, I had a game in Calgary on Saturday night. The Flames were playing a game here at the Saddledome. After the game, I went to the airport, flew to Toronto, and did an afternoon football game, the Argonauts and the Stampeders. Hustled to the air, had a friend of mine there drive me to the airport, get on the plane, and took the flight to Winnipeg, and then rushed right to the arena to broadcast a Flame game against the Jets in the old Winnipeg Arena. So there were some crazy.
You imagine, you say it now, right?
Yeah.
That sounds like.
And it's funny, when I was on the flight going from from Toronto to Winnipeg, I was sitting next to a guy, and I was doing some paperwork for the hockey game, and he says, and so I happened to tell him what I was doing. He said, "You be careful, young man." He said, "I had a heart attack not long ago." So anyway, it all worked out, but I look back on that now and say, how could I have done that? But anyway, I was a lot younger and a lot more healthier and all that sort of thing.
You're chasing it.
Yeah.
To be in Calgary for to call it for 34 years.
Yeah.
When
I called 34 years of games. It would have been 35, but 1 year was a lockout.
I forgot about that year.
Yeah. So.
Do you when you landed in Calgary, did you expect to be here for this long a time, like this amount of time?
I had no idea.
You're just going with it?
When I went to Toronto, I knew I had a 2-year contract.
That's it?
When I came here, I had what did I have? I had I think it was a 3-year contract that I signed in the beginning. So but you don't know. You're hoping, you don't know how long you're going to be there. You come, your family moves, blah, 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 all that stuff. And all you can do is hope for the best and see how it all goes. And as it turns out, contract was up. Well, we have another one for you. Another one. Well, anyway, it worked out really, really good. So I had an offer one time to go to New York and do the broadcasting there, and they turned that one down.
Yeah.
And so, but other than that, that was those. Then the offers to go back to Toronto. Those were pretty much the only other times I'd had any offers to go anywhere else, because I think people at one point got to figure I was quite comfortable here in Calgary, which I was. So, and it worked out. Because if I'd have gone anywhere else, I might not have had a Stanley Cup team to call. Certainly, if I went to Toronto, I wouldn't have.
That 89, that team, that run, you've had a lot of memories over the years. Where does 89 kind of fit into your
life? That's the highlight. I mean, that night in Montreal, I'll never forget it, the night the Flames won the Cup, May 25th, 1989, 35 years ago. We recently had a reunion of that team here in Calgary. All the players were here, except for 3 of them. So
it was a great turnout.
Yeah,
I heard about all the players who were in town. So
yeah, no, that was a wonderful weekend, just an absolute wonderful weekend, and a lot of reminiscing and telling a lot of stories, and some of them got exaggerated a bit, but nonetheless, it was great. But no, that was outstanding. That Stanley Cup win in May 25th, 1925, in the Montreal Forum, the only team other than the Canadians to win the Stanley Cup in the Forum. Montreal won a lot of cups in there, but no visiting team ever won one except the Flames. And of course, that was Lanny's last game, and he scored the pivotal goal and to put them ahead 2-1, and never trailed after that. So, I can recall that game as though it was being played yesterday.
Oh, it's like that. It's forever etched in your mind.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I can see Colin Patterson's opening goal. I can see plainly Lanny's goal. I can see the 2 goals that Doug Gilmour scored in the third period to put it away, and then all the great saves Mike Vernon made. Because he was outstanding in that game. He didn't get a lot of credit for how well he played in that run. I thought he should have been the most valuable player. Don't tell Al McGinnis that. But Al had a great playoff run as well. I think he had points in 19 straight games, and I think that got. But Mike Vernon was very much a key for the Flames, that especially in the first round. In that last game, Montreal was great in most of the games, but in the opening round, the Flames played Vancouver, and the series went 7 games. The Flames finished, I think, 28 points ahead of Vancouver in the regular season, and Game 7 went to overtime in the Saddledome, and the Canucks had 3 breakaways in overtime, and Mike stopped them all. Then in the end of it, it was Joe Lotto kind of deflecting off his skate,
Yeah, I remember that.
a Jim Poplinski pass into the net. So that was the toughest series. The next one was relatively easy. The Chicago series relatively easy. Montreal was a little bit tougher, but getting through that first round was really something for the Flames, considering how much of a favorite they were. That would have been a huge disappointment if they'd lost that in the first round.
Yeah.
I mean, the year before, lost out in the against Edmonton in 4 straight games after finishing number 1 in the league. And so if it happened 2 years in a row, that would not have gone down very well. But fortunately, the Flames held on and won the Stanley Cup. So
When you're around a team that's on a run like that, does the energy is it all around the organization, and you just
it's
you
everywhere.
feel it like every time you go to the rink, you're just like, oh, this is
the rink, or if you're on the plane going to the game and that sort of thing. There was all kinds of the huge excitement that was going on with the team, and I'll never forget the flight back from Montreal. We came back right after the game on a charter flight, and so the boys had a great time celebrating. I didn't. I was offered some drinks to celebrate, but I had committed to CTV the day before that I would do the morning show.
oh yeah, like the breakfast show thing.
Yeah, breakfast show from the Saddledome.
No way. After you left.
Yeah, so when we got back here, it was about 4 a.m. So right away, I went to the Saddledome. And I had to wait for them to come. And anyway, eventually I did that because they were doing the deal whether they won or lost.
Right.
Because if they'd lost, it would be to set up Game 7, which would have been in the Saddledome. So anyway, so I didn't. So then I got to join them downtown at a bar a little bit later on, and I was way behind them. But anyway, those are all great memories from that year, and in the 2 other years the Flames went to the finals as well. Unfortunately, they didn't win either one of them, but they were also great memories from my time with the Flames.
When you're with an organization for that long, like it's you're an integral part of the whole thing, right? Like the voice, like there's just. Does it feel like you're like? What does it feel like? Does it feel like you're like a giant family? Does it feel like this high pressure sport, big business thing? Like, what is it?
I don't know. You felt not part of the team, part of, I guess what's the best way to put it, a kind of an associate of the team, I guess would be the better way to put it. Like you're with the team for every game, home and away, regular season, exhibition season, playoffs. So you're kind of, you get to know everybody really well. But I would never say that I had anything to do with them winning the cup other than calling it for the audience, because I had no input whatever on what was happening on the ice other than calling it as I would see it. So, but to be part of it, and when they win, and you have that great feeling in your own mind, and knowing all the guys, knowing the great feeling that they had, that's pretty much the way it would go. But I never felt. A closeness. I felt close, but not as part of the. Not saying, I'm one of the guys. I'm a coach, or I'm a player, or I'm a trainer. No, I'm a little bit of a distance from that, but I'm there all the time.
Yeah.
And and also I had a color commentator back in those days. It was Doug Barkley, and then Doug he retired, and then Mike Rogers came in. So so those are those were the 2 I had for lengthy terms, and then I had Pete Labardius was the color man my final year.
Oh yeah.
So anyway, but you build an association with them too that never ends. So
did over all these years, like, did any doors open up? Like, were you surprised by anything that opened up? Whether it's the the 2010 like in Vancouver, like is there anything that kind of came out? Not caught you off guard, but kind of surprised you, like, I have this opportunity because of all this work that I've done over all these years.
Well, yeah, it was interesting. I got like the year of the lockout. That was the 04-05 season, which was right after the Flames had that great run in the playoffs, only to lose Game 7 in Tampa. But the next year there was no hockey. It was a labor dispute between the ownership and the players. And so that year I didn't broadcast any games at all. But the Sportnet, which owned the radio station I was working for at the time, they had the broadcast rights to the World Championships that year. And of course, all the best NHL players were going to, because there was no NHL going on at that season. So I went into Innsbruck, Austria, to broadcast all of the Canadian games and the medal games in that tournament. So that was the first time that I got involved in international hockey, other than when the Flames played the Russians or the Flames played the Czechs or that sort of thing. So this was my first tournament that I got the opportunity to cover that. So, and what was interesting is that we stayed in a hotel just outside of Innsbruck. Innsbruck wasn't a very big, was smaller than my hometown. And yet the crowds were amazing in that building. But we stayed in a little hotel, an old hotel outside the city. And Paul Maurice was there. He was the coach for the Florida Panthers. And now he was, at that time, I forget who he was coaching then, but he was coaching some NHL team. But he was hired by TSN to do the color commentator on TSN. So after the games, we get back to this hotel and we'd go into the bar and have a few beer. And so I got to know Paul quite well. So I say that I was cheering for him to win the cup this year. When they were playing against Edmonton, His
post game, his post game when they won the cup.
Yes, I saw that. Yeah, he was outstanding.
It was spectacular.
So that was the first international I got to call, and that was the Canada was playing in Innsbruck in the preliminary rounds, and the medal rounds went to Vienna. So we went in there, which was a huge city there. So anyway, I got to call that, and then of course the Olympics game, that came as a bit of a surprise.
How does that happen? Who calls you?
Well, I got a phone call. I got a phone call from just trying to think of the guy's name. Anyway, I got a call from the guy in Toronto who was with the radio with the network that had the radio rights for the Olympics. And so trying to think. Anyway, he called me and he said, we'd like to have you do the play-by-play of the Olympic hockey, men's hockey in the Olympics in Vancouver. And I said, sure, I'll be delighted to go and do that.
Are you over the moon?
So anyway, that was so that came as a bit of a surprise, just out of the blue, because at that time I was planning to make some plans to go on a vacation somewhere, because there was no NHL teams were shut down while they went to the players were available to go to the Olympics. So anyway, that changed that plan. I was going to Vancouver now, so for 10 days. So that was awesome. I mean, that was absolutely awesome being in the surroundings in Vancouver and the games and I only went to the hockey games. At one point I thought about going out to the ski range on an off day to see the skiing, and then somebody told me there's a lot of traffic going out there. It's going to be a long drive. So anyway, I decided to stay in town and watch from TV. But the hockey was all that I watched. I watched the women's final. I didn't call the women's final, but I was watching the women's final up in the stands at the arena there in Vancouver, and saw them when they came on the ice and had the beer that the girls were drinking out on the ice, and created a little bit of a controversy. So, and in fact, as they were doing that, I was doing my voice report on my phone back to the radio station here, because I was still doing my shows at 8 in the morning and 5 in the afternoon. Oh, wow. So while they came on, just after their game ended, I was on the air with them, and when they came out on the ice with their beer and dancing around and all that stuff, so they were able to get a first-hand account of that on the radio here if you were listening. So, and then of course you got the chance to broadcast the gold medal game, and what was extra special for me. I mean, it was special. Canada won. It wouldn't matter who scored or whatever. But the game goes to overtime, and it's Jerome McGinley getting the puck and setting up Sidney Crosby. They were the two players on the Canadian team that I knew. Jerome was Calgary, and Sidney was from Nova Scotia. I got to know him because I played in some summer charity golf tournaments that were on when I'd go back to the Maritimes. And so anyway, that was kind of icing on the cake to have them, be the key principles in Canada scoring the goal that got them the gold medal. But that was an interesting game with the Americans, and when they scored late in the third period to tie the game, I mean, the building in Vancouver just went like you could just feel it, the downward feel. But then there was a 10-minute break for the intermission, and they came back on the ice, and the fans were all revved up again, and then soon after it all ended. So, but that was, to me, that was the number 2 highlight of my career. The Stanley Cup, number 1, and the gold medal calling of that goal was number 2. And the reason, you could almost say they were a tie, but since I was such a long affiliation with the Flames, to be there and calling them winning the Stanley Cup, that stands
Takes
out.
it.
Yeah.
Do you spend much time like looking back at all these these experiences and these memories? And
sometimes I'll remember in my mind, I'll go through it, but I don't go back and listen to tape recordings or anything like that. So I watched a friend of mine, the game in Montreal where the Flames won the cup. A friend of mine got the television coverage of the game and worked my play-by-play into a recording he
cool.
did. And so I had that, and I listened to that. When did I listen to that? I listened to that at the 25th anniversary of the Flames winning the Stanley Cup. But I didn't listen this year for the 35th one yet, anyway. So, but I have that. That's on reel to reel, of course.
Yeah.
So
you forget about these.
You see these little things they have now, or they don't even have anything. Now you record it on your phone.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
It's so
Anyway,
different.
but that was. I recall them in my mind, but I don't go back and listen other than that one time.
So it's so interesting. As I'm hearing this for the first time, it's just from growing up and out east and just making these steps to all these interesting situations. Like it's a unique story.
Yeah, no, I was very fortunate. There's no two ways about it. A lot of things fell into place. My hometown, the teams were very good when I was calling the play-by-play, and I got the breaks to go to Toronto, and I got another little break to come to Calgary. And so I couldn't, as I say, I made the most of it after that, but it was very, very fortunate. Another interesting point is that my idol as a broadcaster was Danny Gallivan. And he was a longtime broadcaster, primarily in Montreal.
Okay.
I think he started in 1952. And anyway, I got to know him. A friend of mine knew him, so he introduced me to him one time when I was in Montreal. And this was before I went to the NHL. And so anyway, I went there, had a chat with him, and I said, do you mind if I send you a tape recording of my work, and you can do a little critique of it? And so anyway, I sent him that, and he got back to me with a few pointers and blah, blah, blah. And so that's the summer of 78, the year that I left New Brunswick. He was the guest speaker at the minor hockey banquet in my hometown. And during his speech, he got up and he said, there's a guy in this room that all of you know. He's been your broadcaster of your hockey for a long time. He's not going to be here much longer. He's too good to be a broadcaster here. And so, as it turned out, a few months later, I'm leaving and going to Toronto to do the Maple Leaf game. So, and ironic also is that the first game I did in the Montreal Forum, it was my birthday. And Danny was in the booth next to me. He was doing his broadcast, and I was right next to him broadcasting the Flames game or the Maple Leafs game. And so that was another cool little aspect of the whole deal. So
what was it about him that you like that you appreciated? Why did you look at him as like a mentor? What was he so good at?
Oh, he was very good. I mean, I don't criticize or make comments about any broadcaster other than to say Danny Gallivan was the best there was and best there ever will be. He had a knack about him. He could make excitement into the game and build to that crescendo perfectly. And he was really, really good. He was very, very artistic. And I got to listen to him because being in New Brunswick, you'd get the Canadian games every Saturday night. And then I also we get some Toronto games, and you hear Foster Hewitt and then Bill Hewitt and that sort of thing. But Danny was the one that I always really called as my idol. And so he was on a hockey night in Canada. He did the Stanley Cup Finals for years and years and years there in the 50s and 60s. And then he retired. He retired in the mid 80s. And so then he passed away. Soon after he retired, he passed away, unfortunately. So. In fact, I got the day that Lanny McDonald was elected to the Hall of Fame, not when he was inducted, but they had the meetings. The NHL draft was in Montreal. The people that were on the voting committee for the Hall of Fame were in Montreal. And I was outside the door or out in the room when they made the announcement of who were the Hall of Fame selectees. And so I saw Danny there because he was on the committee. And I said to him, well, I'll get together. I said, I'd like to get together with you now, but Lanny's been inducted here, so I've got to stay and get an interview and all that sort of thing. He said, well, that's fine. We'll get together again later. So unfortunately, we never did. So, but that, as he passed away, with about 2 or 3 months after that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Quick.
So anyway, that was, so anyway, at least I got to know him and so I had some good experiences around him. So
you said something really quick there, the like artistic side of it. The art of the broadcast. How did that enter into your kind of your like how you kind of honed your craft, like the art side of it? Like
that's to me. In my case, it was automatic, natural. In fact, I had somebody come to me one time and say to me, they tell me that I get too excited. My voice gets too high when there's a goal or something like that. They said, how do you control yours? I said, I don't know. It comes automatic. And so it was interesting. It was soon after that Bob Cole was here to broadcast a game, or I saw him somewhere. Anyway, so I said to him, Bob, I had a question from a guy who's doing play-by-play, saying that his voice he can't raise his voice without irritating the listener. Is basically what they were saying. And I said, do you do anything special? Because with me, it just comes natural. And he said, no, it just comes natural with me as well. And so I'm presuming that with Danny, it was probably natural as well. Your voice is the way it is. So there's a voice for play-by-play, and there's another voice for being a broadcaster. And play-by-play, because your voice has to go up and down. And when you go up and down, you have to make sure it doesn't irritate the listener. And if you're going at this level, all of a sudden you jump to that, but you have to go gradually up to it. So that's a little, little thing. And again, you get to know how to do it.
Yeah.
So.
And do you think that natural ability is kind of what gave you your, like the length of time you worked?
Yeah,
like
I think so.
It was just who you were.
Yeah. So
it's fascinating.
Yeah. So.
When you decided to retire, was it just, did you know it was time? Like, did you know that it was just?
It was time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You just kind of knew it was like.
I just knew it was time. Yeah. It was, I just could feel my voice was getting weaker.
Yep.
And I just felt, now's the time to go. It was interesting. Before I retired, I met with the guy who started me in radio, the guy from the ball played ball, who was the radio station manager, who later went on to become a lawyer. And so anyway, he's in New Brunswick, and so I was chatting with him, and I was saying, I'm thinking about getting out. I said, he said, you're better to leave a year early than a year late. And that kind of pushed me over the top that, okay, I'm finished. So it was a tough decision to make, but nonetheless, I felt it was for the best.
Yeah.
Because I could feel in some of the games at the end of it, toward my voice was getting raspier. And so that was only going to get worse as you go along. As you age, you're older, you don't have the same strength you have when you're young. So,
and it's a big lift to do this job, right? Like early mornings, late nights, 82 games. The cycle is, it doesn't.
And the other thing I said when I retired is that when I was broadcasting, hockey always became first. Now that I'm retired, family is going to become first. And so, I missed out on a lot of things.
I can imagine.
Family things, because you're on the road somewhere or whatever, because I was fortunate to broadcast all those games. I never missed one. And so, I'm really proud of the fact that I went did 3,162 games and didn't miss one. So,
it's incredible.
Although I came very close to not finishing one.
No way.
This was in the 04 playoffs.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, in the 04 playoffs, the Flames are playing San Jose, and the first game of the series is in San Jose, and it's an afternoon game. And I had a bit of a cold, and so this game is into the third period tied. And my voice is really starting to go. And Mike Rogers, my color guy, he could tell that I was really pushing it to finish. And so he would hop in. Whenever it stopped, he'd jump right in. And so anyway, fortunately, with 24 seconds left in regulation time, Steve Montador, the late Steve Montador, scored for the Flames. And I got, the adrenaline rush came, so I got that out to call the goal to win the game. And so they win the game. Otherwise, that game would have went to overtime. And I'm not sure I could have gone the whole way in overtime. And so as it would turn out, so though I go down after the goal, so then I go down to the dressing room after to do an interview with Steve. And so he comes out, and I could hardly talk when I got to go. By this time, I hadn't talked for 10 minutes, so there was really nothing there. So he comes out, and I said, well, great goal. Tell us about it. And they didn't say it that clearly. So he just went on. He talked for 5 minutes.
No way.
He described the goal, that he went on to talk about the game and the ebb and flow and back and forth. So every time I saw Steve after that, when he went to another team, I thanked him for that, because I might not have been able to finish that game.
That close.
And that would have been, that would have put a blemish on my record. Mm-hmm. So
to have that record, 3,160.
Yeah, 3,162. Yeah.
It's not like it shouldn't be possible, right? Like I don't know how that actually.
Yeah, I don't know of anyone that broadcast that many and didn't miss any.
Yeah.
So there's some others that were around earlier, but they missed some apparently from what I was told. So, so I was very fortunate.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Retirement, family. Has anything else got your attention in retirement?
I did. I still, in the beginning of it, I did some work for the Flames. I was kind of an ambassador for them, and they had what they called the dressing room experience, where they had a dressing room right down by a room right down by where the dressing rooms were, with a big glass window there that you could see the players going on the ice for the warm-up and that sort of thing. And so people would buy tickets to come there, and they'd have some food for them and some drink and some beer and wine. And so I kind of hosted that. I'd be myself, and there'd be an alumni player, former Flame. We'd come in and I'd set up the game, and then we'd tell stories for about a half an hour or so. Cool. While they, ate, and then when the players come on the ice, they'd rush to the window to see them. So I did that for 5 years, I guess, and then COVID came, and so that shot that down. And then when Daryl Sutter came back, he didn't want anybody down by the dressing rooms on game night. So that was the end of that one.
It was over.
But anyway, so I did that, and then I did some other little things, and continued to play in charity golf tournaments and all that sort of thing, which I had done even when I was broadcasting. I never became a member of a golf course until after I retired, or 2 years after I retired.
Wait.
Yeah, that's when because I was into so many tournaments, charity tournaments, that it was no sense for me to be a member of a course, because I wouldn't play there enough. Because I figure I played in about between 300 and 400 charity golf tournaments in my time here.
No way.
Now Bearcat Murray played in about 1,000, but that's no. But so I do that, and then eventually I slowed down on the golf and became a member of the Cottonwoods. So,
that's where you are.
So I do that, and family things with the grandkids, and grandkids are dancers and actors and all that sort of thing, going to plays and dances, and it was just things that I missed when I was in hockey with my own kids. I watched my grandkids do those things. So it was that, and I'd get away in the wintertime for a couple of months or 3 months and go in the sun somewhere and relax there. So that's pretty much been my pattern since I retired. So,
amazing.
Yeah.
This has been really cool.
Yeah.
I appreciate you taking the time.
I hope I wasn't talking too much.
No, that's the best part about this. I don't have to say anything.
It's funny, things just pop into my mind as I'm talking.
Which is really fun for me to hear, right? Like it's just when you have those moments, you're like, oh yeah, and then this. Those are fun to hear, because it's like you're experiencing at the same time I am. So
good.
I end the show with one question, which would be an interesting one for you, just because of how ingrained you are. When I say Calgary, where's your head go?
My home for 45 years. And without Calgary, I wouldn't have had the career that I had. Without the Calgary Flames and the great fan support that the Flames got, that allowed me to continue to be the broadcaster I was all those years, I have a great, great feeling in my heart for Calgary. And people have said to me, in fact, it was interesting when they had the reunion here not long ago. Cliff Fletcher was there. He was the general manager of the '89 team.
Yeah.
And Cliff came over to me and said, "Oh, you still in Calgary?" He thought I had gone back to New Brunswick when I retired. So no, I said I've stayed here the whole time and all that stuff. And so, yeah. So this is my home. I mean, I've lived here longer than anywhere else, and the people have been outstanding to me, and they've treated me very well. I've tried to give back as best I can with charity events and that type of thing, although I'm not as active now as I used to be. But no, Calgary is home to me and always will be home.
Yeah, it's yeah. You've been such a big part of the city for so long.
Yeah.
It's really that question for me, for you to get the answer out of you is it's a cool experience for me.
Yeah, that's Calgary to me.
Yeah. Thanks for your time.
My pleasure.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.